I would be able to speak, but I would not be able to prepare anything. So that's what you're getting today. I told him that maybe I could talk about Marvin's book, which I've been reading. And he said, you have to tie it back to the lectionary, which it's Lent season. Oh, Marvin Wickware? Not everyone knows. Yes, Marvin Wickware, sorry. He is a former member of this church, I guess a diasporate member of this church, somebody who has been at this church and then gone elsewhere. And he teaches at, remind me, he's in Chicago, Lutheran School of Theology. Okay, yes, in Chicago. Yeah, he's just extraordinary theological thinker, and has really been an influential part of this church in the past. And his book is Loving Through Enmity, Healing the Broken Heart of Christian Anti-Racist Work. And it is extremely insightful and extremely dense, and so much like Marvin himself. So I was thinking I would talk through some of what I had been reading there, and Franklin said that I had to tie it back to the lectionary. It's Lent season, makes sense. You want to go through the Lenten lectionary, everything like that. So I looked at the lectionary for today, and there's 4 readings, 2 of them from the Old Testament, 2 of them from the New Testament. And the Old Testament reading includes the anointing of David, and it includes Psalm 23. It's sort of like the total eclipse of the heart of the Bible. It's like the don't stop believing of the Bible. You start saying it, everybody knows what's happening, everybody joins in. It feels like, like the biblical equivalent for me. If you know anything about me preaching, in our kinds of churches where we like to focus on the words of Jesus, I have a tendency to be like, no, let's go Old Testament with this. So it's sort of like feels like a little bit of an easy choice, but versus the readings in the New Testament, Ephesians 5:8 through 14. Has historically been used to sort of bolster, has historically been interpreted in sort of a white supremacist lens. And John 9 through 1 through 41 has historically been used to patronize disabled people. So it seems like a pretty easy choice, but as I was reading through these New Testament passages, I was really drawn to what's going on in them, and really want to approach these in a little bit of a different way from what we may have historically heard of them. So I'm going to go in for the difficult ones, and I'm going to go in with no notes, no outline, nothing. So hopefully this will work out. Ephesians 5:8 through 14 says, "For once you were darkness, but now in the Lord you are light. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. Try to find out what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to mention what such people do secretly, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible, for everything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, 'Sleeper, awake, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.'" So that is the Ephesians, a very common motif of light and darkness that we see in the New Testament. But before we even get into that, I think it's important to interpret it in the context of John 9. So, John 9. As he walked along, Jesus, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he, the man, went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed and received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they asked the blind man again, What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." And he said, "He's a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked him, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He's of age. Ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he's a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses. We do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here's an astonishing thing. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and you are trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." That's the word of the Lord. So this one is a very interesting passage. So John 9 in particular, we have this statement in here that has often been used to instrumentalize people who are disabled. And a lot of imagery here that we've traditionally interpreted as understanding spiritual versus physical blindness. But I think what was really helpful for me is as soon as I looked at this passage, I realized that it sort of made me uncomfortable for a lot of reasons. And so I started I did just the littlest bit of Googling. I'm not going to say I didn't prepare at all for this. I did the littlest bit of Googling on different readings of this passage. And there's some really interesting ways for us to look at what's happening in this passage, I would say. And I think that will help us reread the passage from Ephesians 5 as well. One thing that's going on is at the beginning is that we often understand in our reading of this passage that neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. And that one we're always hearing whenever we hear this in a church context as God made this person blind so that I could heal him at this moment. Which seems like a pretty weird thing to say, pretty weird thing for God to do, to make somebody blind for their whole life just so that Jesus could come in, swoop in, and heal them at this moment. But there's also a lot of really unusual, we're just talking about Jesus coming in and healing somebody who's blind, there's a lot of unusual features of this passage. First of all, it's one of the longest passages in the gospel that doesn't have Jesus in it. You notice from verse, as soon as Jesus sins the blind man, he disappears from the narrative until almost the very end. It's one of the longest passages that doesn't have Jesus in it in the Gospels. There's also, as has been pointed out, a lot of parallels, way more parallels between this blind man and Jesus than there are with any other characters in the Gospels. It's a really unusual character who has no name. He's not one of the named disciples. We don't pay attention to him as much as, as Mary, Martha, Lazarus, as almost anybody that we traditionally come around to in the Gospels to talk about as following Jesus. But this blind man receives so much attention and so much character development through this story. So one of the ways that his narrative parallels Jesus' story is to do with how he's responding to the Pharisees. One of the things that is remarkable is that he comes back to his that when the Pharisees are questioning him, he responds very factually. He's on trial the way that Jesus is on trial before his crucifixion, in a sense. He knows that this is a very delicate situation and that he needs to handle it in a very specific way. And then at the very end, he comes back at when the Pharisees keep accusing him and they say, stop, defending this guy. He's a sinner. He turns around and teaches the Pharisees in a way that nobody does until the book of Acts, other than Jesus. That space isn't given to anybody in the Gospels other than Jesus to turn around and teach the teachers, except for this man who was formerly blind. So with all of these facts in play, I think that it's really interesting for us to re-examine who this person is. The first thing I want to take on here is how we traditionally interpret this verse 3, where Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. So it's, first of all, this passage can be interpreted a number of ways. One of the ways is there are a handful of scholars who repunctuate this sentence. So that handful of scholars, we have to remember that this passage was brought down to us through many layers of John remembering after 60 or 70 years, plus somebody transcribing for John, plus other people replicating this work over a period of time. And every single one of those layers is trying to interpret what's going on in this text. The simplest thing to do to interpret is to put a piece of punctuation somewhere. So it's not exactly it's not exactly very broadly accepted that this interpretation, but there is an interpretation that says that Jesus answered instead, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind, so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day." There's a very different connotation just to putting the period in a different place. There's a different interpretation of it, though. There's interpretations of it that don't rely on changing punctuation at all. There's an interpretation of it that says, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him." But it isn't said how God's works are being revealed in this moment. There's an interpretation that says that perhaps the reaction of the disciples, the reaction of the people around him, is what is revealing God's work through this man who was born blind. But I think, regardless of what we think about that particular passage, we also need to understand what is happening here. This is not a healing story. It's such an unusual story that way. The fact that we often interpret it as a healing story goes back to our understanding of disability under the medical model of disability, which says that disability is a thing to be fixed. It's a thing to be accounted for. It's a thing to be changed. A thing that needs to be supplemented with aids, with other things. But as I read through this story, I see so many indications that this is not a healing story. That they come upon this man who was blind from birth, and at no point does this man say, "Jesus, heal me." At no point does the man ask for anything. Jesus sees this man, says that he's going to do something, spits on the ground, makes mud, spreads it on the man's eyes, and says, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. This is a sending story. This is a prophecy story. When I start reading this the way that I read the sending of Isaiah, I see a completely different thing going on. We're seeing Jesus changing this man's state as a way of prophesying. That as arbitrarily, that the changing of a man from blind to seeing is not a matter of healing or making whole, but rather of delivering a message to people who need it. And at no point is there anything in the passage that suggests otherwise. But I think that what we want to, what's interesting is that as we go through the narrative, actually, I think it becomes apparent that that's exactly what's going on. So he's sent to the pool of Siloam, and we get no sense that this guy has requested to be changed. At the same time, when Jesus sends him, he goes. He doesn't know what's going to happen. Jesus doesn't tell him, like, "Go here, wash your eyes out, you're going to have sight, then you're going to be, et cetera, et cetera." He just goes. And he washes his eyes, and he can see. And immediately what happens is people start finding out about this, and then the Pharisees find out. And then they are like, "Wait a second. this is not squaring with what we know about this world. Here's this guy who's a sinner. He changed this guy from blind to seeing. And this shouldn't be possible. Now, it's something you have to understand about the time period we're in also, is that the thing that the disciples say at the first, who sinned, him or his parents, is the assumption that people lived with in those days. Now, as many people as there were who lived in the Roman Empire who were blind, especially in this context, in the context of the Jewish people and their belief system, they had this feeling, they had this sense that blindness in particular was a spiritual disease, and that it had some consequence either from being sinful yourself or somebody having sinned before you. And so that was an important aspect of this as the Pharisees are coming into it. They are coming in believing that this blindness was a spiritual disease that was put upon this person for the purpose of punishing someone. And so it's particularly egregious that we would have somebody who is no longer blind. And so they are coming after this person saying, like, what is going on here? Like, this is the Sabbath, first of all. So the man who had been born blind, when he goes to when his friends are asking him, this is a point that was being made, and his friends, in one of the things I was reading, when his friends are asking him, he says, he made some mud and he put it on his eyes and I washed my eyes off and then I could see. When the Pharisees ask him, it's a completely different response. He put mud on my eyes. Then I washed and now I see. It's way more passive. And that's part of that is that using the word made for anybody to make anything would be a violation of Sabbath. He knows, he's in this situation where he knows exactly what the Pharisees are looking for. And part of the reason for that is probably because he was blind. He probably knew exactly how to navigate his world, exactly what people were expecting of him, exactly the expectations people were placing upon him spiritually, psychologically. He knew how to navigate these different situations because he had had the experience his whole life of having to navigate these kinds of situations, of having to comfort other people's belief that his blindness had to do with some sort of spiritual blindness, of having to satisfy people's expectations. And so he's had to navigate these kinds of social situations his whole life. And so when he's responding to the Pharisees, he's navigating this very much as somebody who had spent his whole life navigating these situations would. There's a whole part in there about his parents and how his parents respond, and you know they're afraid of the Pharisees. But I don't remember anything about that part of the passage, so I'm going to skip over it. But like, you know, it's really interesting how he comes to this point with these Pharisees, where the Pharisees keep coming back to him. They keep coming back to him. They dismiss him, they bring in his parents, they dismiss his parents, they bring him back in, and they are really trying hard to reinforce their belief about what the world is supposed to be. You know, before, the earlier part, they were divided. They were like, this guy has to be a sinner. He has to be somebody who doesn't come from God. And the other half of them were like, well, but he just healed this guy was blind, you know, he just made this guy who was blind see. Like, that doesn't make sense. And so when they bring him back, there isn't that division anymore. They said, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. They've figured out their divisions there, and they're like, we need to double down. All those people who had doubts before, they were like they're looking at the way that they understand the law, the way that they understand the world, and they are ready to say, nope, Jesus is a sinner. And so they're coming back to him like, what's the trick here? How did he open your eyes? And the man says, this thing that he has this insight that, again, nobody else has other than Jesus. That here's an astonishing thing. You don't know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. So we come back to this sense in which this man was sent, not healed, sent. Because where Jesus arrives at the end of this, so he gets driven out. So let me get to this idea of being sent, right? So he again, the Pharisees, they say, you were born entirely in sins, and yet you are trying to teach us. And so again, that's reinforcing that idea that the Pharisees had of that blindness was a spiritual affliction that one has because of sin. And when Jesus hears that they had driven him out, he approaches the man, and the man immediately knows that this is the Son of Man, that he becomes a disciple of Jesus immediately. In fact, at this point, being a disciple of Jesus is a nominal thing. He's been a disciple of Jesus his whole time. But Jesus says in that moment, after this entire story, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. And some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, surely we are not blind, are we? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. So I want to go back to this one, because this is also one that is often interpreted in a very problematic context that I think we are losing a lot when we interpret it this way. So Jesus says, I came into the world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. So it sounds like a typical reversal. The last may be first, and the first may be last. The rich are going to be poor, the poor are going to be rich. But I think there's something really mystifying in when Jesus says, if you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. A lot of the ways that I've heard this passage is to say, if you were blind, you wouldn't know what you were doing, and so your sin wouldn't attach to you. And so you wouldn't be judged for it because you were blind. Who knows better? But I think that we lose a lot by not taking this in the context of the man who was formerly blind as sent. Because the man who was formerly blind, as we've seen through the passage, understands so much more because of his blindness, because he had to navigate the world as a blind person. And so one of the ways that I was looking at in I just briefly Googled the commentary about just this verse, is that there's a context we lose in the translation where there is a sense in which Jesus is saying that, let me see if I can remember this, your blindness, that your seeing makes you unaware of the fact that you don't see properly. That because you were not blind, that you trusted your seeing, that you believed your seeing. That if you were blind, you would know to distrust the things that you see through your traditional interpretations of the law, through your traditional interpretations of the society around you, through your traditional interpretations of everything that you already believe. You would know to distrust how you have been taught to see the world, and you would see rightly the way that this person who was formerly blind sees. So what we end up seeing in this passage is that Jesus takes a man who was born blind, who was supposed to have a spiritual illness, and makes him see, not because everyone who was born blind needs to see, but because he needs somebody who was born blind to be an emissary to the seeing. Because he needs somebody who can be his prophet to the Pharisees who think they see, but can't see him, because they think that they see clearly. And so what I am coming to in the very end of this, and I do actually want to tie it back to a passage in Marvin's book, because Jesus says, I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. So that there becomes so that people who do see are given the ability to not see, given the ability to distrust what they've been given their whole lives. And that's where I want to tie back. I mean, there's so much more fascinating stuff here, and I probably, if I had written an outline, I wouldn't have gone over in time here. So I apologize for that. But there's this thing where Marvin is talking about James Cone, that I have not read any of James Cone's books. I, desperately want to, especially after reading this. But Marvin is, our brother Marvin is commenting on and summarizing Cone, and says, through the cross and resurrection, God's love levels a judgment against all powers that carry on the legacy of empire. God is wholly identified with those crucified in all times, and rejects absolutely that their crucifixion is compatible with God's will. So here's where I really want to focus. All those powers that dispossess, enslave, and execute God's beloved children fall under God's judgment. God's wrath is directed against all those individuals who rest comfortably in a world structured by such powers, and are all those who dare to claim that such exploitation and violence are ordained by God. On the cross, Jesus dies as one of those who are poor. God follows through on their love for those oppressed, and those who align themselves with the power of empire find that God's love has nothing for them but an unyielding invitation for them to join those oppressed through repentance and the promise that those powers will ultimately be overcome by God's life-giving power. What we see is that whether we're talking about people who are sighted, people who are given privilege by any means in our world, that there ends up being an invitation through Jesus to join with the oppressed, to join with the people that God completely identifies with. Completely identifies with. And that's the invitation we see through the prophecy of the man who was born blind. And that's all I've got.